The Lego Movie is a wartime propaganda movie made by Russia and directed by John Yaucha. It is meant to make you feel like you're watching a traditional brick movie. Like when people use Lego to make their own movies. And it does succeed in that, by making you wish you were watching one of those instead. This thing is an insult to the realm of animation and cinema as a whole. It is not a family movie. It is one directly aimed at kids. And we'll discuss why it is so bad. The people in the Lego Movie can best be described as nothing more than entitled. Along with all the pre-established characters that they slammed in with all the loving care of a used car salesman, the original ones are purely despicable. Emmett, Clodsell, and the Grandmaster keep on trying to tell a Lord business that everyone should just be themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. Which doesn't sound like a bad idea if you don't think about it for more than a second. But in actuality, there are tons of serial killers, bigots, and violent psychos in the world, so there will definitely be some here. And the craziest thing about it is that they try to steal the crag glue, the thing that will ultimately keep everyone safe and keep those bad people in line. And I know that they exist because Batman is there, which means that his serial killer rogues gallery is undeniably there.
Move on to our next member of the Rogues Gallery, Victor Zaz. After losing his family and fortune, Zaz became completely disillusioned with life and tried to commit suicide. However, his attempt to end his life was interrupted by a homeless man who tried to stab Zaz for not giving him any money. Zaz would kill this man, and in that moment, realized the meaningless nature of life. From then on, Zaz had a new reason to live, to liberate others of their pointless existence. He would mark each kill by cutting a scar on his body, which tallied to hundreds of victims. Zaz is another one of the Batman villains I find most interesting and easily makes this list. Now, Professor Pig's story is a crazy one because it's just pure horror to the letter. Starting out as a member of a secret society known as Spiral, Laszlo Valentin was an exceptional scientist. But after developing a mind-altering chemical akin to Alzheimer's disease, Pig ended up getting exposed to said chemical and ended up becoming an insane lunatic off the jump. Donning a butcher's uniform and a pig mask inspired by the circus, Laszlo became Professor Pig, starting his lunacy by kidnapping random people of Gotham and subjecting them to the most horrifying obscenities imaginable. Striving for perfection due to the chemical Laszlo had been exposed to, Professor Pig would surgically remove parts of people's bodies he deemed imperfections. And this was including removing a person's wart on their face, maybe a hand or two, a leg, and if deemed be by Professor Pig, maybe even the switch of genders. All, of course, completely involuntary. And to make matters worse, there are moments in comics where he keeps his victims awake while performing surgery, singing opera music. It's insane. Now, somehow, this manages to get only much, much worse, because Professor Pig also takes it upon himself to lobotomize his victims he deems as perfections to become his Dolatrons. And if you aren't familiar with what a lobotomy is, it's one of the most horrifying things any one sole person could do to another. But I'll simply put it as a procedure where someone sticks a metal stick just behind your eye to reach the part of your brain that is your soul, essentially. And they take a hammer to that said stick and destroy that part of the brain, leaving you almost like a living zombie. This is what Professor Pig subjects his innocent victims to whenever out on the streets of Gotham, and later forces his victims to become his mindless minions. Like, the Joker is evil and all, and definitely has to go, but Professor Pig is on a whole nother level. He has to go like yesterday. He's just viciously evil with no redemption in sight. It's just the body's way of saying thank you. When I think of Professor Pig, I also can't help but relate him to the psychotic minds of Dr. Steinman from Bioshock and the other Eddie Gluskin from Outlast Whistleblower, who still both traumatize me to this day. It's just downright disturbing when you think about how all three of these people have the obsession for perfection in surgery, and they just distort these people's bodies in such disturbing ways. It's just unnaturally horrifying. There are also several stories in which Professor Pig displays true horror, but most notably, it's in Grant Morrison's run of Batman and Robin. And if you haven't read it, go and read it right now, because it's absolute perfection. In this story, it's Professor Pig's breakout introduction as a new villain in Gotham. After a heist gone wrong, one of the Pig's henchmen, named Nico, tries to get out of Gotham with his daughter before Pig gets to them, knowing that if Pig gets them, they're better off dead. But sadly, Pig finds them before they can leave and uses his Dolatrons to capture Nico and his daughter. Awaking hours later, strapped to a table, Pig says how it's strange that the worst place in the world can be anywhere, and that he waited till he was awake so he could feel every moment of his glorious transformation. As Pig's horrifying Dolatrons place a mask over Nico's face, burning away everything that made him the man he once was in front of his daughter, with Professor Pig adding that pain is the beginning of perfection, and he will make Nico perfect. But not just Nico, no, but his daughter as well, saying that Nico will help with the process of her perfection, and they'll both become lovely dolls together. Within the next issue, we follow Damian Wayne as he finds Professor Pig's lair, which is based inside of a carnival. And while looking around, from a desolate cage, a girl cries out to Robin for help. Robin looks over, and the girl from before has been tortured and subjected to the repulsive process of becoming a Dollatron. Before Robin can do anything to help her, he gets ambushed by several Dolatrons. And hours later, Robin awakes to the sounds of drills, oinks, and opera music. Professor Pig mutters nonsense to himself, preparing to lobotomize the girl with a power drill, until he sees that Robin is woken up from dreamland. Professor Pig begins to dance and twirl in excitement, until looking at Robin's face takes his mind to a place he'd rather not go. Thoughts of perfection over and over clawing at his mind, that his work is never truly good enough, while twirling power tools frantically. Changing the music from opera to sexy hot disco, he begins to pose a very deranged scenario to Robin, where Robin is this beautiful woman and Pig is this attractive man. Busting down on the dance floor for Robin. Undoing his shirt, Pig starts a manic fit that Robin is judging him for his weight, and that he drinks too much, and that he forgets to take his medicine. Yelling aloud with no order in his mind that he's an artist. How's he supposed to work on antipsychotics? He hates this music. Thrusting himself onto Robin, oinking like a pig. Then pissing himself, saying he wants to be sick in front of everyone, giving us just a little peek at Pig's deplorable mind. Robin sitting through Pig's manic breakdown, he eventually breaks out from his bindings and beats the holy hell out of the Dolatrons and Pig. After subduing most of the Dolatrons, Robin rushes over to the girl, where we find out her name is Sasha, promising to Sasha that he'll save her from this nightmare. And in the middle of the scuffle, Sasha manages to burn Pig with a nearby candle to help out Robin. This ends up causing Pig to run away in a cart with Robin not far behind. But in the process, Robin ends up abandoning Sasha, leaving her in the nightmare by accident. Now, Now, Pig doesn't really pose a physical threat, so Batman and Robin end up taking him out easily. And after getting cuffed, he disturbingly wants to be hit over and over because of his punishment kink. Now, Professor Pig may end up in prison after this horror show, but his influence doesn't end here. When attempting to save the people turned into Dolatrons by removing their masks, the masks end up ripping off their faces in the process, meaning the victims can't be saved no matter what they do. And after Sasha was abandoned by Robin, she lost her faith in superheroes and vowed for revenge. Unable to reverse her appearance given by Pig, she'd be cursed to look like a Dolatron for the rest of her life. And to spare Pig's victims, in the cover of Night, she'd not only kill her father, but every one of the Dolatrons as well, going on to become the villain known as Scarlet, sidekick to Red Hood during his villain era. Sasha grew to hate Robin with every fiber of her being, becoming a brutal villain shown to remove the faces of those who oppose her, while also afraid of her own face in the mirror. Afraid that if she were to even slightly take the mask off her head, her face would melt with it. But later in the story, after leaving Gotham, it's left to interpretation on whether Scarlet lives by the end. Because after forced to make a quick getaway, while leaving Gotham, the Dolatron mask falls off from her head, but it's never shown if she kept her true face. But no matter the face she'd be left with, she would still be left with the trauma left by Professor Pig regardless.
I did all I could to fix her, to make her perfect. But by the time you came along, I couldn't even look upon that spoiled canvas of her face. I couldn't let that bitter face that created you in this world. I had to end it, Immoral. For you. For Mother. She left me no choice.
I believe that this is probably Professor Pig's best display of horror in comics, and looking for other stories, you'll either see Professor Pig hung upside down from a cross in Batman 666, or what Professor Pig's true face looks like in Damian Wayne, Son of Batman, and in another instance, creating demented versions of Nightwing and Damian Wayne. But in Arkham Knight, it's almost like they kicked the horror up a few notches, and I mean, just listen to some of his audio recordings in-game.
Big family, growing week by week. Nowadays, you know pain. They know nothing of misery. I call them my Dolatrons. You only move at night. Find the magic of earth to inhabit secret places in forgotten parts of town and the wastelands. Where the locals say to burn and excited.
Because Professor Pig is roughly the same character as he is in the comics, there's only a few minor changes. Operating under his establishment called Pretty Doll's Parlors, as a demented surgeon, Pig kidnaps innocent people of Gotham and performs surgery on them, turning them into his Dolatrons. During the events of the game, Batman finds 6 of the Dolatron victims scattered around Gotham City with distinct opera music playing nearby, and words like defective or failure near them. The disgusting process of Pig converting someone into a Dolatron corrupts their DNA and fingerprints, leaving Batman no way to identify the bodies than by using a deep tissue scanner, just to find distinct markings recorded on a missing persons database. After finding all 6 victims, Batman cross-references all the leads, bringing him to Pretty Doll's Parlors. Hearing the same opera music that was near the victims leads Batman to become incredibly suspicious. And going further down the rabbit hole, Batman ends up finding Pig in the middle of converting another person into a Dolatron. Batman intervenes, stops Professor Pig after the most blood-curdling boss fight in all of gaming, and saves other missing people from the fate of becoming Dolatrons. God, when this game came out, this mission was definitely the most disturbing. It just felt like something straight out of Saw. Beyond this, he appears in several shows, but I'm not going to talk about them. Now, I took a poll before making this video to see out of Zaz, Scarecrow, and Pig who were the scariest, and you all picked Pig. So I hope after watching this video you all realize now just how demented and psychotic Professor Pig truly is. Professor Pig is a truly demented character through and through, and I'd honestly go so far as to say that he's worse than the Joker, and that's saying something, given the Joker will kidnap disabled kids just to kill Batman in front of them. So be warned, if you hear opera music with a couple of power drills going off nearby, be on your guard, because a little piggy might not be too far off. From a bridge, James Gordon Jr. suffered from so much head trauma from the fall that growing up he developed psychopathic tendencies. Examples include James Gordon Jr. getting quick to anger and malicious behaviors when upset, like killing and dissecting animals, dressing up and idolizing the Joker on several occasions, and even going so far as to kill several of Barbara Gordon's friends because he didn't like them. With the exception of Dick Grayson, because in his eyes, Dick was always nice to him and pure of heart. And also in James Gordon Jr.'s early years, he was also incredibly smart and intuitive, and always knew how to cover up heinous acts given that his father was a detective, and would closely admire the works of art he'd seen from case files brought home by his father after work, most specifically the Joker's. And what's so incredibly interesting to me about James Gordon Jr.'s early years is how his family looked upon him. Like introduced to his sister Barbara Gordon, it was almost like she knew there was something off with him. Like she could just see through his lifeless eyes something pure evil. As Barbara Gordon always speculated that her brother was responsible for many horrific acts, but never had any evidence to back up her claims. Just that he was always around the vicinity when something bad took place. And as a child, James is off-putting even to his mother, who feels the strangeness of him, but isn't sure how to put it to words. Then there's Jim. He's a father, but he's also a veteran detective. He can see the dark spark in a baby who doesn't cry, whose classmates mysteriously fall ill when he's displeased with them. A grade school kid who casually disembowels a bird and dresses as the Joker for Halloween. That last one is grade A fridge horror, so Jim can see that there's an issue, but even so he balks at allowing therapists to administer the psychopathy checklist to his son. After all, just as he's a father, he's also a detective. He's a detective, but also a father. Still, all that came before pales in comparison to what happened when Gordon took James and Barbara on a family vacation, during which Barbara's longtime friend Bess disappeared. Officially, Bess's disappearance remains unsolved to this day, but there has long been a whisper of suspicion floating through the Gordon household. The belief that James, only a child at the time, may have been responsible. So to understand why, we have to rewind. Imagine this. The Gordons. Jim, Barbara, James Jr., and Jim's second wife, Sarah, arrive at their comfortable summer house and are greeted by Bess, a science-curious girl that's Barbara's age. The friends share a science kit, Barbara with the kit herself, and Bess with a key shaped as a bat so that they can use it together. Bess takes note of James Jr.'s glasses, making a little joke about them. James fiddles with the lock on the kit and nearly breaks it. Later, Bess leaves for home. She walks through the woods, passes beside a river, a shadow falls over her, and that's the end of Bess's story. Her body is never found, and it isn't even certain that she's dead. She's a teenager after all. Sometimes they run away. The only thing is, when Jim goes upstairs to speak to James, he finds his son alone, hunched over the unlocked science kit, leaving Jim and the rest of the Gordon family to ponder the question if James Jr. had something to do with Bess's disappearance. After this traumatic event on the Gordon family, his father and sister would always feel a looming presence of evil from James. So Commissioner Gordon would try to discipline his son any way he knew how. And when nothing worked, he even at one point put James Gordon Jr. in a cell next to the Joker, the kid's idol, for a whole night. In essence, nothing ever worked, so James Jr. was sent off to live with his biological mother in Chicago. However, things only managed to get much worse as James grew up. Lacking any empathy for human life, he quickly began to start killing random people all over the city to feel anything. But nothing ever changed. His sanity was falling down a mudslide at this point, until James Gordon Jr. enrolled into an experimental drug facility that was testing a new drug that would provide chemicals in the brain for people with psychotic tendencies to feel any sort of empathy. For a while, this worked on James Gordon Jr., almost changing himself for the better. But after some time, he began to see empathy or emotion itself as a crutch, a weakness even. So James Gordon Jr. took it upon himself to reverse engineer the drug so that he could eliminate any kind of emotion from his body. In a way, essentially killing his soul if he ever had one to begin with. Once it was complete, he felt at peace until watching the news, he saw something strange. He saw Batman smile on TV. And Batman never smiles. So James Gordon Jr. wanted to give this Batman a reason to never smile again, leading James to make his way back to Gotham to kill his family and become this different Batman's nemesis. Starting slow, he'd pay kids to break into the Gotham Zoo and free all the animals, visit his father to let him know that he'll be working at a hospital in Gotham as a caregiver because he's suddenly reformed after taking a new experimental drug, so he says. And beyond catching up with his father, he also meets up with Dick Grayson to catch up and talk about old times, even though Dick is a little apprehensive on meeting him. So, to break the ice, he reminds James Gordon Jr. about old times playing in the park together with his sister and another kid, but he can't remember who it is. To which James eerily says, Ben Wolf. Like James has done something wrong already. Until James saved himself by saying he actually ran into Ben the other day and that he was a real jerk back then. But now he's a pharmaceutical representative who lives on the east side, saying it's funny how some people take a while to grow up, while some other people just never change. Feeling the uneasiness of the conversation, Dick decides that he's had his fill of James Jr. and leaves to be Batman. The next morning, James Gordon Jr. is seen at Ben Wolf's house checking his mail. Then he enters his home and makes his way towards the basement. And as James proceeds down the steps, a disfigured body can be seen hung up with body parts surrounding him, as James tells Ben that he just ran into Dick Grayson. And guess who they were talking about? You. And through Ben's missing jaw, he begs James to stop. But James just pulls out a saw and says, now, where were we? Reading this from the graphic novel, I swear to you, it sent a cold shiver down my spine like you wouldn't believe. Further into the story, Commissioner Gordon gets quite suspicious of James Jr., so he goes to his workplace and swipes one of his son's pills, and gives the pill to Barbara to reverse engineer to see if his son is actually telling the truth about the experimental medication. Meanwhile, at Arkham Asylum, Joker is in the middle of being transferred when he begins to taunt a doctor and his life on how the doctor's wife is always sick and he's always taking care of her night after night. The doctor wonders how Joker could even know that, but in the middle of talking, he begins to laugh uncontrollably, shouting through the laughter that something's secreting from the Joker's skin, as he kills one of the security guards. Meanwhile, back at the lab, the test results come back, and it turns out that James Gordon Jr. somehow reverse-engineered the drug to actually amplify psychopathic tendencies. Jim then asks Barbara what his plan could even be, and Barbara mentions that he wouldn't be able to just dump this psychoactive drug into the waters. It would just get filtered out. And even if he did, the potency would be too weak to affect adult brains. However, for children, it'd be a different case entirely. And suddenly a horrible look falls over Jim's face, and he realizes that James has been doing the nutrition runs for the hospital. Meaning he's been passing these pills out along with the baby formula in an attempt to poison Gotham's children. Jim rushes down to his car and speeds all the way down to James Jr.'s apartment, and as he gets there, Jim kicks in the door and he shouts for James to show himself, but finds that no one's home. While searching through the apartment, Jim finds a small box in the closet, and as he begins to open it up, shortly after this, Harvey Bullock walks in telling him that Joker's out. But Jim doesn't answer, and Harvey asks if everything's okay, as Jim pulls out Bess's bat-shaped key, saying no. Nothing's okay. Jim rushes back to his car and he calls his ex-wife Barbara to tell her what's going on. He frantically tells her to stay inside because the Joker has escaped and he's probably going to target them. Barbara then asks why the Joker would do that, to which Gordon shouts because the Joker always comes after them, telling her to just stay inside until the hotel security comes. However, Barbara opens the door to someone knocking, and as the door opens, Jim hears a loud crash from the phone as he runs up the stairs asking what's going on until the phone disconnects. When he finally reaches Barbara's room, he breaks the door down shouting for her, but he only sees blood on the shower curtain. Gripping the curtain and pulling it open, he finds Barbara naked in the tub and blood dripping from her mouth. Shortly after this, Barbara is in critical condition and they've halted the toxin's progression because she was infected with the Joker toxin. This leads Batman and Commissioner Gordon on a wild goose chase to find Joker, believing him to be responsible for the attack. However, it's not what they'd expect, because after Dick would find the Joker refusing to fight back and admitting he wasn't the one who hurt Barbara, which is completely unlike him, Dick begins to realize that this was all a huge misdirection, finally seeing who could have actually hurt Barbara. And over in Oracle's office, she starts tracking surveillance on James, and just as she thinks that she's found him, James appears behind her, asking if she's happy to see him, and grabs her. Later, Gordon and Dick arrive to her office to find everything destroyed and her wheelchair bloodied with no sign of Barbara, as Dick says to Gordon that they will find her. Elsewhere in Gotham, James steps out of the shadows asking Barbara if she likes the place, because he figured that they would take a stroll down memory lane. But Barbara says that when Batman and her father find him, he won't ever see the light of day ever again. However, James leans down telling her that it's funny. He's been having trouble being afraid of something like that all of his life. In fact, the only time he's ever been close to being scared was the day that he met Barbara. It was the day that their father introduced them to each other. It was like she was able to see the bad in James, asking Barbara, when were you able to tell? Like, really tell. And Barbara tells him that it was when he heard that bus driver. James leans back, stating, that's right. She called me Four Eyes. But how did you even know that it was me? Barbara tells him that it was the way that he heard her. Two razor blades taped to a matchbox so that when it was opened, the cuts would be too close to stitch. So it was done by someone who wanted to hurt and torture them. James stands silent and then says, why don't you go ahead and take a look at your legs? James pulls the blanket off of her legs, revealing two knives stabbed into each of them, telling her that they're nice and tight next to her femoral arteries. So if she pulls one out, she'll bleed out in a matter of minutes. As he says to Barbara that when he was put in that cell next to the Joker, he said to the Joker that he really wished his sister would just slow down for a change, instead of always being in a rush. But he never realized the Joker would actually go ahead and make his wish come true, in which James apologizes. Barbara is in utter shock as to what James just said, leading James to disturbingly laugh, saying that she should have seen the look on her face. After so much gloating, Barbara then says that she thought he would look different than all the other villains in Gotham. She figured he would just appear in her bedroom one night and strangle her, but instead he's like everyone else, just sitting there gloating, keeping her alive. But in the middle of her talking, James rips one of the knives out and says that you're right, but this time it's not about you. It's about Batman. In the middle of Dick talking to Tim Drake trying to find Barbara, the signal cuts out and James starts talking to Dick, knowing full well he's Batman. As James goes on to say every step of his master plan and how he jokerized his mother as a way to get back at his mother for institutionalizing him, along with adding that he surely poisoned the children of Gotham with his drug, essentially meaning that in a decade from now, there will be hundreds of kids roaming around just like him, hundreds of psychopaths in the making for him to usher in. However, before hanging up on Dick, he tells him that he's going to first kill his sister, then his father, and when he's done, he can't wait to see Dick quit because the grief will kill him as well. Putting down the radio, he turns around to find that Barbara has vanished, and James gets a little excited because now it's like a deadly game of hide and seek. As James tries to find Barbara, she comes out of nowhere with the other knife that she took out from her leg and uses it to stab James in his eye. James falls to the ground, and like an 80s horror villain, he looks at her and he says that she shouldn't have done that. Barbara tries to crawl away, but James isn't too far behind, about to kill her, until Dick swoops in, sucker punching James in the stomach. Saving Barbara, she questions how Dick knew where they were, to which he says that when Dick met James days prior, Dick had injected a tracer onto James when shaking his hand, because he's not an idiot. During this, James slips out and tries to escape, climbing up to the bridge where he fell off so many years ago as a baby. And in the middle of celebrating his escape, James is then shot in the leg by his father. And when James tries to hobble forward, his father shoots him in the other leg as well, causing him to fall over the bridge. But before plummeting to his death, his father leaps forward, grabbing his son's arm, because even if he is a monster, he's still his son. The next day, James is placed into Arkham Asylum, and after Gordon had tests run on baby formula that might have been passed around that was poisoned, the tests came up completely clean. However, there's no real way to know if it was poison or not in the end. So all the both of them can really do now is pray that in 10 or 20 years from now, there aren't more people like James Gordon Jr. roaming around in Gotham City. As the story ends with a panel of a baby that may very well be infected by James Jr.'s psychoactive drug, implying that James Jr.'s plan may have succeeded.
With Tarantula, whose real name was Catalina Marias Flores, and she liked Dick Grayson a lot more than he liked her. And the night the two got together was just after she had murdered Blockbuster, who was a nemesis of Nightwing's at the time. And Nightwing was right there when it happened, and he could have stopped her from killing him, but he didn't because Blockbuster was going to kill a lot of his friends. And I do think that if he had more time, he would have stopped her, but he hesitated, and that hesitation gave her an opening to finish him off. But like I say, I think if he actually had more time to think about it and process it, might have only needed a few more seconds, he probably would have stopped her, which is really shown by how he reacts to this, because he has a really hard time living with himself after this has happened. And he not only feels guilty, but he feels like he's betrayed the ideals that were taught to him by Batman. And after Tarantula killed Blockbuster, she then slept with Dick Grayson, even though he said several times he didn't want to, but he was too in shock from the murder to stop her. And Dick Grayson actually tried his best to help her become a hero, but sadly she lied to him and said that she was trying to be a hero, when really she was starting her own gang of criminals with her as the supervillain leader. and eventually Dick Grayson is forced to bring her in for murdering Blockbuster, though fortunately he is acquitted of charges for his part in this. And this is undoubtedly the messiest relationship that Nightwing gets in this series, and quite possibly the messiest one he's been in overall. And it all went wrong and ended badly for all of them, so it's safe to say that the two of them will.
Now, unlike the others we've seen before, these two actually have appeared in the Lego Movie universe. And we all know how healthy their relationship is. It's canon in every version. And every version has Joker be an abusive asshole to Harley, and that's before we even get into the serial killer tendencies that Joker possesses. Lee wants us to hate and throw all our anger at Lord Business, the villain of this movie. But I'm not joking, Lord Business is the only one who acts like a reasonable human being, as he is afraid of people who want to try something different, which is totally reasonable. And the cop who dares argue against freezing his parents, and, well, does exactly that. Yes, they'll be frozen, but at the same time, they will be safe. And if they really are dangerous, they won't cause any harm. It's bad, but a sacrifice that is necessary to make. And the people who want to start a revolution try their hardest to break into his house and steal his stuff without even considering his private property and consent. The important part of a villain is selfishness, which is why characters like Buzzsaw, The Wall, and Polka Dot Man have gone down in history. Lord Business is not someone who comes off as selfish. He is considerate and caring for everyone here. And the master builders dare try and question his reign, with everyone expressing their creativity. Like, please, everyone deserves to be themselves. Harvey Weinstein was just being himself. So don't hate him or punish him at all. Mainstream animated movies are often aimed at children, with a few minor exceptions. So it is very important that they teach life lessons that they need, especially when they come from dysfunctional families or aren't able to go to school, and thus can't learn these important lessons. So, let's look at all the lessons I found in the Lego movie. Serial killers and rapists should be protected so long as they're your family. You can never commit a crime so long as you be yourself. Rules are always meant to be broken, and anyone who tries to keep you safe deserves punishment. Yeah, I've seen wartime propaganda movies with better messages than this. Fuck this movie and fuck the message that it tries to commence. And I'm so glad to watch this multi-million-dollar empire fall to the ground, as you have truly shown yourselves to be the malicious and cruel monsters that you are. Only interested in the money you want to gain, without even considering the dangerous implications that you've left. And the only reason anyone will want to watch this is because it has characters from better source material. Source material that put actual heart and thought into every scene they did. All I can say is do better, Warner Brothers. This is absolutely atrocious. My name is the writer Azra, and if you're watching it on the day it's uploaded, you're a fool. An April Fool! Ha 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 ha! You see how stupid you sound when you don't take it with context?